Our past was slavery. We cannot recur to it with any sense of complacency or composure. The history of it is a record of stripes, a revelation of agony. It is written in characters of blood. Its breath is a sigh, its voice a groan, and we turn from it with a shudder. The duty of today is to meet the questions that confront us with intelligence and courage. Frederick Douglass, The Nation's Problem. You know, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use. But in fact, it is not flooding. It is remembering where it used to be. Toni Morrison, The Site of Memory. Author's note. The visits I describe in this book took place between October 2017 and February 2020. I visited some places on multiple occasions, others only once. All quotations were captured with a digital recorder. Some names have been changed to protect the privacy of individuals. I would like to note that while this book is focused on the places where the story of slavery in America lives on, the land upon which many of these historical sites sit belonged to indigenous communities before it belonged to anyone else. Of the 8 U.S.-based sites I visited for this book, New Orleans sits on Chitimacha and Choctaw land, Monticello sits on Monacan land, the Whitney Plantation sits on Choctaw land, Angola Prison sits on Choctaw land, the Blandford Cemetery sits on Appomattox and Nottoway land, Galveston, Texas sits on Acokisa, Karankawa, Atakapa land, New York City sits on Muncie Lenape land, the National Museum of African American History and Culture sits on Nacotink, or Anacostan and Piscataway land. It should be noted that native territories often overlapped and had malleable borders that shifted over time. This list is not definitive, but is one attempt to acknowledge those who first traversed this land and to do so as accurately as possible. Monticello Plantation. There's a difference between history and nostalgia. Heading out from my home in Washington, D.C. in the morning, I drove against traffic, moving from the new condos of an increasingly gentrifying D.C. through the single-family home suburban landscape of Northern Virginia and into the vast green expanse surrounding I-95 South. As I drove to Monticello, I observed how Virginia is largely a tale of two states. Northern Virginia, those incorporated municipalities that serve as suburbs to the District of Columbia, has always felt somewhat distant from the South in the ways I grew up understanding it. But beyond the suburbs, once I started driving past the diners and gas stations with Dixie flags hanging in their windows, I was reminded that this state was once the bastion of the Confederacy. As I made my way down the highway, finding myself on cruise control both in the car and in my mind, I saw a sign in my peripheral vision indicating the entrance to a plantation. Assuming it to be Monticello, I put my blinker on and began to turn, only to jerk the car back onto the highway when I realized that this was not Thomas Jefferson's plantation, but that of James Madison, Jefferson's dear friend, confidant, fellow Virginian, and successor to his presidency. Madison's Montpelier Plantation, less than 30 miles northeast of Jefferson's, is almost a prelude to Monticello. Not simply as a result of their relative proximity, but because the two men share similarly contradictory relationships to the aspirational documents they ushered into existence while enslaved people worked on their plantations. The Madison family held more than 300 enslaved people over the course of their time on that property. Both of the men inscribed words that promoted equality and freedom in the founding documents of the United States while owning other human beings. Both men built a nation while making possible the plunder of millions of people. What they gave to our country, and all they stole from it, must be understood together. I did not turn into Montpelier, but there was something about driving past it on the way to Monticello that reminded me that Jefferson was not singular in his moral inconsistencies. Rather, he was one of the founding fathers who fought for their own freedom while keeping their boots on the necks of hundreds of others. Within a few miles of Monticello, The highway transitions into a one-way road lined with white pines and hemlocks. I pulled into the dirt parking lot and made my way up the concrete stairs to see if tour tickets were still available. One of the first things I noticed about Monticello is how the vast majority of its visitors seem to be white. It's not so much unexpected as it is markedly conspicuous to see a plantation that has had its ratios reversed.